Hello everyone. Now we'll look into the inductive method of analysis to determine the drug DNA binding effects. In this we'll talk about partition analysis and viscosity studies. Then we'll also look into another topic called as gel electrophoresis, which is used to determine different types of DNA forms, that is supercoiled and linear and nicked form of DNAs. Coming to partition analysis. Partition analysis, or where we apply a phase partition method. We know it is a simple distribution experiment where we have an organic layer and an aqueous layer, and we take the two different solvents, aqueous and non-aqueous, and we take the solute which is distributed between the aqueous and non-aqueous layer based upon its own distribution coefficient, where we give D is equal to C organic by C aqueous, or based upon whatever the equation is there. Okay? So we know there will be a small amount of one component going into the another solvent component based upon its distribution. It's Nernst distribution it is based upon, right? Now this has been applied in under determining the DNA binding ability of metal complexes or drug molecules based upon its partition nature. So what is done is an aqueous buffer containing the ligand and DNA is taken in a separating funnel or a distribution apparatus kind of thing, and it is thoroughly shaken for 2 to 3 hours with an equal volume of non-aqueous solvent, that is an organic solvent. That is, you take the ligand and DNA in an aqueous buffer into a separating funnel. To that you will be adding a non-aqueous solvent, let's say pentanol, hexane, whichever system it has been used, right? So the equal volumes will be taken in both the aqueous and non-aqueous solvent kind of thing, right? So aqueous is our buffer system, and this non-aqueous system will be an organic layer kind of thing, or such an organic solvent saturated with buffer components there, right? So after a proper distribution, means after a particular shaking time and a distribution, the system is brought to equilibrium, and the ligand concentration in the two phases is measured spectrophotometrically at isobestic point or at a lambda max of the ligand. So the based upon spectrophotometric measurement, that is the absorbance value of the two aqueous layer as well as non-aqueous layer determine the concentration of the ligands in its free state and in its bond state kind of thing. So what is done is that at lambda max or at isobestic point, the absorbance is measured for both the non-aqueous layer as well as the aqueous layer. The free ligand concentration, that is CF, in the aqueous phase is determined by calculating C organic obtained from the absorbance measurement at lambda max of the ligand with a known epsilon value. So what is requirement is the ligand's epsilon value at a particular wavelength should be known. So based upon that epsilon value, you calculate the concentration from the absorbance. So from the absorbance, what you do is you calculate. So if you take the, let's say, because we have taken the DNA and the ligand in aqueous layer, whatever ligand is bonded to DNA will be remaining aqueous layer. The unbound ligand will be transferring into the aqueous layer, and there will be distribution occurring between the aqueous and non-aqueous layer for the unbound ligand. So after the partition experiment, the non-aqueous layer is taken, and it's the free ligand in that is being determined based upon the distribution coefficient formula, that is D is equal to C organic by Cl. So what we want is the concentration of the free ligand, so which is given as Cf is equal to C organic by D. So you determine the concentration of ligand in the non-aqueous phase, that is C organic, right? Apply the distribution coefficient value, and then you can calculate the Cf value. Easy along with it, right? So you can determine CF if you determine C organic using the A is equal to epsilon C equation if you take. So from absorbance you can calculate you get the absorbance, you know the epsilon value, the path length is unity kind of thing, so you can get the concentration. So that concentration related to C organic. You know the distribution coefficient of the ligand that you are used. So based upon that, the CF value is calculated. So where there is a distribution coefficient of the ligand in the solvent system, and C organic is concentration of the ligand in the organic solvent. So the total ligand concentration, that is the CT. How CT is determined? CT is determined in the aqueous phase. So after the equilibrium, the non-aqueous phase is used to determine the CF value, and the aqueous phase, which is having the bond DNA and the free DNA, bond DNA and the free ligand. This aqueous system is subjected to a dissociating agent, that is a dissociating agent like sodium dodecyl sulfate is added to it, and this dissociates a DNA ligand complex. So all the ligand gets dissociated from the DNA, and what we have is the free ligand as well as the bond ligand to it. So this gives you then you measure the absorbance after dissociating the DNA ligand complex, then you measure the absorbance at the lambda max of the ligand. That will give you the CT value. So you determine CT, you determine CF. From the equation you can calculate CB, right? From CB you can calculate the binding ratios of a particular ligand. So this is how partition experiment is used for determine the binding ratios of a particular ligand with a DNA. Right, so once you determine R value, you can calculate R by CF versus R. That will give you the binding isotherm, and you can calculate the binding constant K value from the intercept kind of thing, right? So this is an example for with respect to dynomycin, which is an DNA double-stranded DNA binding. So the buffer system used there is PBS, which is the buffer. So the DNA and dynomycin is taken in this buffer, and the organic system, organic solvent is pentanol solvent that is used. The lambda max of dynomycin is 480 nanometers, and epsilon value is known. So using the distribution coefficient value for dynomycin in the pentanol and buffer system, that is 13.7 at 25 degrees Celsius, you can calculate the CF value from, and then calculate CT, and you can calculate the binding ratio values with using the formula there, right? So the PBES buffer is actually a phosphate buffer having phosphoric acid, sodium dihydrogen phosphate, sodium chloride, and EDTA solution, which is having a pH of 6.8. So the buffer system changes with respect to the ligand and the DNA that has been in consideration for binding analysis. So another example is actinomycin, which is done with 1:1 mixture of hexane and 1-chlorpentane, that is organic solvent. One part of hexane and one part of chloroheptane is taken as organic solvent, and the aqueous system is again the PBS buffer system. The lambda max for actinomycin is at 445 nanometers at 25 degrees Celsius. In this case, CT is measured at different, that is isobestic point at 455 nanometer with a known epsilon value. So once you obtain the CF and CT value, you can plot the binding isotherm and calculate the binding constants and binding ratios accordingly. Now the other method is the viscosity experiment or viscometric titration, which is a physical method to determine the nature of binding of the ligand to the DNA. So viscometric titrations of duplex DNA, that is double-stranded DNA, is commonly used to determine whether a compound intercalates into double helical DNA or not. So to determine if a compound is forming an intercalative binding or not, viscosity experiment is a well-known experiment used for determining that. What is happening is the intercalating agents usually induce the unwinding of supercoiled plasmids and a lengthening of linear helical structures, which are reflected by an increase in viscosity of the sample. So when the intercalating agent binds to DNA, either like supercoiled DNA or linear DNA, it changes their structures, they increase their length, and by increasing the length, the viscosity of the sample also increases. The viscosity increases when the intercalation happens. So several polyaromatic molecules stabilizes that is a DNA molecule by intercalation, like ethidium bromide or dynomycin. They do intercalate and they increase the viscosity of DNA solution. So this is based upon a classical intercalation model which is proposed by Lerman. So the classical intercalation model proposed by Lerman states that the lengthening of the DNA helix occurs when as the base pair is separated to bind the ligand. So when the ligand which tries to bind to the DNA, right? So if DNA is trying to accommodate this ligand between this base pair, that is this base pair and this base pair, right? So the base pairs, they shift, they change to accommodate this ligand, right? So the distance, you can see, that is changing for this particular base pair. So when this distance, there's a change in the length of the DNA, total DNA. If you can see, the total DNA length is increasing, right? So the increase in DNA length causes viscosity increment in the DNA solution. So viscosity also increases due to increase in length of the DNA double helical structure. So this is the basis for viscometric titrations, because as length of DNA increases due to intercalation, viscosity also increases. So basically, used instrument is a simple Ostwald viscometer, or a slightly modified Ostwald instrument that is called as Oberlin viscometer, where nothing but you take the buffer solution, you take the DNA and the ligand and measure the viscosity, flow time actually, right? So the experiment is carried out in a thermostat at a temperature of required temperature, in some case like 27 degrees Celsius. So what is done? A titration of ligands like ethidium bromide or Hochschild 355, that is a non-intercalator but an antibiotic kind of thing, or metal complexes are performed by addition of small volume of concentrated stock solution to the DNA sample in the viscometer. So first, only the buffer is run through the viscometer to determine its viscosity. Once the buffer is run, then buffer with DNA, only DNA is run. Then after that DNA, to this DNA, the ligand concentrated at different concentrations, ligand is added to the DNA solution, and the viscosity is measured. The time required for the flow of the solution is measured. So first only buffer time is measured, then for DNA time is measured, then for DNA plus ligand time is measured, right? So the viscosity is measured based upon this following relative equation, where eta represents the viscosity of the DNA in presence of the ligand, and eta naught represents the viscosity of DNA in absence of ligand. So like if eta, this is in presence of ligand, T minus T naught by T naught, and eta naught is equal to T minus T naught by T naught. So here you can say I'll convert this into T prime to differentiate between the two. But what is measured is relatively the viscosity of the only DNA and viscosity of DNA with ligand. So this is DNA with ligand, this is only DNA. Viscosity is measured. The difference, they check if the viscosity is increasing or decreasing for the DNA ligand complex. So if viscosity is increasing, means the length of the DNA is increasing, so that's why viscosity is increasing. That means the ligand is bound by intercalation mode. But if a viscosity is decreasing, that means the binding is not by intercalation, it is by groove binding or some other non-intercalative binding, which is causing the bending of DNA, shortening of DNA size, that increases the that decreases the viscosity of the solution. So what is in where see, the T is observed flow time for DNA containing solution, and T naught is the flow of time of buffer alone. Viscosity data are plotted as n by n naught cube root of n by n eta by eta naught versus the binding ratio R. So the binding ratios has to be calculated by spectrophotometric method. Based on the binding ratio for the particular concentration, you get the viscosity and you plot a graph of viscosity versus the binding ratio. That will tell you the slope of that, will tell you the mode of binding, if it is a intercalative or a non-intercalative kind of thing. So normally an intercalator like ethidium bromide, right, which is an known intercalator, right, it shows a slope. So this is for ethidium bromide, right, it shows a slope of near to 1 right? And that is linearly the viscosity is increasing as the binding ratio also increases. So there's a linear increment in the viscosity. But in case of Hofstadter 3358, which is a minor groove binder, this is a structure for it, its viscosity is not increasing, or it stays constant or slightly decreases. So that represents that this particular ligand is not going for any interaction. Its slope is almost lesser than 0.4, which shows it is not having an intercalation mode of binding. Same way, the experiment is carried out with different ligands like ethidium bromide with with reference to ruthenium, lambda ruthenium complex and delta ruthenium complex. So it is clearly seen that the ruthenium complex also show very less viscosity changes compared to ethidium bromide. So that means the ruthenium complex don't go for intercalation mode. They are basically a groove binder from that is can be explained from the viscosity measurements. So the viscosity experiment helps, or it is a helpful method, experimental method, to determine if the ligands that bind to DNA are having an intercalative mode of binding or a non-intercalative mode of binding. The next we'll talk about is gel electrophoresis. So gel electrophoresis is an electrophoresis method where basically it is an electrokinetic process which separates the charged particles in an electric field based upon its size, kind of thing, right? So electrophoresis is an electrokinetic process which separates charged particles in a fluid using a field of electric charge. It is most often used in biological experiments or where to separate proteins, molecules, or DNA, and it is achieved through several different procedures depending on type and size of molecule, right? So what is done in gel electrophoresis? It's a commonly used technique in laboratories, bio laboratories or science laboratories for separate charged molecules. We already told that nucleic acids are charged molecules, negatively charged. RNA, DNA, proteins are also charged. Their net charge will be different based upon the kind of amino acids they are having, right? So these will move differently in an applied electric field. So and based upon their size, kind of thing. So charged molecules move through a gel when electric current is passed across it. An electric current is applied across the gel so that one end of the gel has a positive charge and other end has a negative charge. So two electrodes are placed and charge is applied to a gel like gelatin or a Argos gel or agar-agar gel. So some kind of gelatinous system is used. An electrode is put, so positive charge electrode will be there and negatively charged electrode will be. So oppositely charged species will move towards the opposite electrode. Like negatively charged like DNA and RNA, if it is negatively charged, it will move towards a positively charged cathode, kind of thing. Positively charged electrode, that is anode, and the positively charged species will move towards the negatively charged cathode, right? So that is the movement of species, but the movement will depend upon the rate of movement will depend upon the size of the molecule, macromolecule there. So the movement of charged molecule is called migration, and molecules migrate towards the opposite charge. The molecule with a negative charge will therefore pull towards the positive end, and the gel consisting of matrix, permeable matrix, means the matrix what you have is a bit permeable and it's like a sieve, right, for filtration kind of, through which the molecules have to travel. So through the spaces the molecule has to travel. So the movement will be affected based upon the size. So smaller molecules migrate through the gel more quickly, and larger molecules will with larger fragments will migrate very slowly. So they will have a difference in their migrating. So this is how the components in a biological sample separated based upon their charge and size. So this is the instrument, gel electrophoresis, where you have gel electrophoresis plate where it is coated with what you call a gel electrophoresis, that is either Argos gel or some polysaccharides kind of thing. You have the two electrodes, the negatively charged electrode, positively electrode, to one side. You apply the sample, and you then after applying the sample, putting the sample, then you apply the electric voltage, then the movement of the sample occurs, and you get the results like this once you do the staining kind of thing, right? Different stainings are done, or UV chambers are used to determine where the movement of species are there. So you get the what you call spots kind of thing, right? So this is an illustration of DNA electrophoresis equipment used to separate DNA fragments by size. So the gel plate is kept in a buffer solution kind of thing. The DNA samples are placed in wells, right? So this is the well kind of thing where the sample is placed. Once the electric current is passed across the gel, the negatively charged DNA moves towards a positive electrode. This is the movement speed. So this is a kind of spectra what you cleavage what you see. This is the real-time instrument, this is how it looks like, and this is the output, the plate when it is been analyzed by a photometric method, by capturing the photo of it. This is the result what you actually see, right? After the development electrophoresis experiment, the sample is dyed, and based upon the dye it will give different intensity in the UV region kind of thing, right? So you can see the larger molecule. So this is the marker that is used to determine which each species where it is moving, right? So this is 1000 base pair, 600 base pair, right? So 100 base pair moves very fast, so it is moving a long distance from here to here, right? But 1000 base pair, it is moving slow, so it will move only till this particular distance, right? So based upon size, so 15,000 base pairs means size is more, so it moves very slow. But 100 base pair, size is very small, so it moves very faster to a longer distance, right? So electrophoresis enables you to distinguish DNA fragments of different lengths, right? So different length of DNA will move in different fashion because of their size kind of thing. So the length of DNA can be determined. DNA is negatively charged, so therefore when electric current is applied to the gel, DNA will migrate towards a positively charged electrode. Shorter strands of DNA will move more quickly through the gel than the longer strands, right? The use of dyes like fluorescent tags or radioactive tags are used to enable the DNA on gel to be seen after they have been separated. They will appear as bands on the gel. The DNA marker with fragments of known length is usually run through the gel at the same time as the sample. That is, as markers are used as reference where where the compare the samples with the actual ones kind of thing, right? So by comparing the bands of the DNA samples with those from the DNA markers, you can work out the approximate length of DNA fragments in the sample kind of thing, right? So this gel electrophoresis is this method. It's not just to determine what kind of DNA sample you are having, how much is length kind of. It is all determine which type of DNA you can have, right? So it is used in DNA cleavage studies also, right? So DNA cleavage is nothing but DNA is cleaved at a particular positions by either enzyme, nucleosomic enzymes, or by oxidative cleavage using hydrogen peroxide, or sometimes the metal complexes which bind with the DNA itself, they itself to do the cleavage of DNA. So the cleavage studies can be studied using gel electrophoresis, right? So DNA cleavage interactions between a plasmid protein, this is a BRP2 is a plasmid protein, plasmid DNA, and the complex are analyzed using this particular DNA. The electrophoresis experiment is done which is using an Argos gel, right? Right. So what the experiment involves is incubating the metal complex. What are the metal complexes analyzed is incubated with this plasmid DNA with a suitable buffer at 37 degrees Celsius for around 2 hours. Then the gel is subject the sample is subjected to DNA gel electrophoresis using a dye, that is ethidium bromide kind of thing is used as the dye in this case, right? So which is used to photograph the UV light kind of thing, right? So when the dye is kept in the gel plate, when it is kept in the UV chamber, the dye will reflect the UV chamber, and that is photographed, right? So that is what the bands what you see here, right? So this is the bands when the ethidium bromide, the dye or radioactive tag, what is there, that reflects the UV light. So that is captured in a photograph, right? So the nucleus efficacy of complex are studied with gel electrophoresis using supercoiled plasmid DNA with using the different buffers kind of thing. So when this plasmid DNA, which is also called as a circular plasmid DNA, if it undergoes a cleavage by the metal complex or by the enzyme or by the hydrogen peroxide, wherever it is, it might cleave into different forms, right? So the circular plasmid here, the first form is called as a supercoiled form, where there is no cleavage occurring, right? Or it is a standard kind of thing. It is just right, and when it cleaves, it gives you the relaxed form of helix, or it is also called as nicked form, that is cut form kind of thing, where the supercoiled DNA opens up into a circular form and there occurs a breakage kind of thing, right? And if two strands break, that gives you the next type of DNA, that is called as linear form too. So these three travel, they move in a different speed. The supercoiled, that is form 1, travels very faster because it is compact. It is even though the DNA is number of it's supercoiled kind of thing, but it is coiled and it is shape is having very less size, so it moves very faster. But the first when it gets nicked, means when it's one strand breaks and it opens up into an open circular form or relaxed form, it moves very slowly because of its larger size. It increases its size on opening up, so its movement is reduced. And when the two strands also breaks and it forms a linear DNA, its movement slightly increases than the open circular form kind of. So the three shows a different kind of bands in the analysis kind of thing, right? So form 1, that is supercoiled one, right, that travels very faster, right? So it has covered more distance, right? Then the form 2, which covers very small distance. It is open circular form, so it is covering only small distance. And form 3, which is the linear one, which is somewhere in between here, right? So this is the linear one, so it is covering more distance than the form 2 but lesser distance than form 1. So this is how the cleavage study is used, electrophoresis study is used to determine the cleavage ability of the metal complex towards the DNA form. So what are these supercoiled, linear and open circular form of DNA kind of thing? That we'll see, right? So this is form 2, we said, that is the nicked DNA. Form 3 is the linear DNA. Form 1 is the supercoiled. So supercoiled DNA is nothing but a very condensed DNA where the DNA strands are highly strained and they are twisted. They're twisted, multiple twistings are there, and it is completely compact DNA structure. So this is called as a supercoiled DNA, right? That is nothing but you take a circular DNA and that circular DNA is compressed or coiled up very much tightly. So that is called a supercoiled DNA. That is, for example, you take a rubber band. The rubber band is considered, if you take a rubber band, the rubber band is circular form, right? This is circular DNA, right? Now this rubber band, you try to contract, try to reduce its size. So what happens? Because to relieve the strain, the rubber band, when you try to squeeze it, right, it will start bending, right, and it starts coiling up. So that kind of coiling nature is seen for this supercoiled DNA, right? So when it gets relaxed, it gives you the circular form of DNA, right? That is supercoiled form. When it gets relaxed, it gives you circular form of DNA. And when there's a cut in this particular circular form, right, you can see a small cut, right? So this is called as the nicked DNA, where a single strand of the circular DNA is cut, means there is a cleavage there, there is a breaking, there is no phosphodiester bond between the nucleotide, so there is a cleavage of the side there. So this what you call broken circular form of DNA is called as the nicked DNA. See here, this is the broken strand there, right? So this kind of DNA form, that is a form 2, this is called as the nicked DNA. So this is form 1, supercoiled DNA, right? And form 2, nicked DNA, right? Now once there is a cleavage of the second strand also, when this strand also breaks, it gives you the third form of DNA, that is called as the linear DNA, form 3, right? So that's how the DNA, from the cleavage study, the DNA structures are been obtained from the plasmid DNA, that is a supercoiled circular DNA, which converts into relaxed DNA. When it undergoes cut, it gives you nicked DNA, and further cutting of the second strand in the DNA leads to linear form of structure, right? You can see here. But some case what happens is, the relaxed form nicking at one site, it may undergo catenation cross-linked chains can be formed that will show a different form of DNA structures kind of thing. This is the relaxed equilibrium between the supercoiled DNA and the relaxed DNA, right? So this DNA, you apply strain on it, you try to compress it, it undergoes super coiling, right? It gets coiled up. You can see a circle is making it an 8 shape kind of thing. So this is called a supercoiled DNA, and this is the relaxed circular form of DNA, right? This is the plasmid DNA. On relaxation, on cutting, it gives you the nicked DNA. Further, the second strand is also cut, it gives you the linear DNA kind of thing, right?